Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is excitingly our 10th episode of the pod. We've made it to double digits, and I'm excited to have a guest here today who has got some really exciting updates to share with us about everything in the world of Hivemapper. Please welcome Gabe to the pod. Gabe, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on, and congrats on getting to 10.
Thank you. It's a milestone for me, and it's a milestone for Hivemapper as well. You guys are coming up on your 1 year anniversary, which we're gonna talk a little bit about today, all the incredible progress you made and sort of what's ahead. But before we get too far into that, I'd love to just get a bit of background on who you are, how you got to the space, to the project, and we can jump in from there.
Sure thing. Yeah, so I'm Gabe. I'm the head of operations at Hivemapper. I joined about a year ago just as the network was getting started. And we're a small team, only about 30 people. So I do a lot of things over at Hivemapper. It includes business analytics, customer support, and customer success, shaping a lot of how the reward strategy works. And yeah, it's been an amazing ride over the past year. A little bit about me and my background. I'm a big transportation nerd. I've always been obsessed with maps, and so this was a really exciting opportunity and a team I was really jazzed to join. Before joining Hivemapper, I spent several years working at Lyft, and I was building a new business line from scratch there. I love the early stages of building something new and exciting and world changing. And so when I learned about Hivemapper and the vision of a better way of building maps, I was really passionate about that dream. And what I really was excited about was it's not just a big vision. There's a very clear business strategy for biting off bits of that huge market bit by bit and growing into something really big and world changing. It's a great vision. It's a great strategy, and I think we're executing really, really well.
Yeah, all the progress that you guys have been sharing certainly would help solidify that statement there. Can you talk to me a bit about the catalyst behind launching Hivemapper? What was the genesis behind wanting to start the project? What's part of the problem that's sort of associated with what you're solving? For those that aren't aware of what seems like maybe something we take for granted, can you talk a bit about why Hivemapper exists today?
Yeah. So Ariel, our co-founder and CEO, had been working in maps for a long time, going back to working on Yahoo Maps back in the early days of online maps, almost 20 years ago. Back when we used to have to print out sheets of paper
Oh yeah,
to
the
get
MapQuest
anywhere.
days.
The good old days. I know I had
Right.
a folder full of them. And back then, he really saw how challenging it was to keep maps up to date and how expensive it was to build something modern. At that time, Google Maps was coming around and really revolutionizing how maps were made, but they were doing it in a very centralized way. Putting fleets of vehicles all around the world, collecting imagery, their own cars, their own camera systems and positioning systems, paying the drivers. It was extremely capital intensive, and it was very difficult for any smaller entity to compete. Even one with the resources of Yahoo, it was difficult to compete. And he had this vision of a better way of building maps where we take advantage of the fact that there are billions of people around the world traveling through our world every day with increasingly sophisticated technology in our pockets, in our cars. Why can't we do the mapping? Why can't we do all the imagery collection that's needed to build a modern map? And I think with the advances in technology, just hardware, cheap compute, really good bandwidth, as well as the innovations on the Web3 blockchain side, it was kind of a perfect storm for a better way of building maps. Not something that hasn't been tried before, but something that's newly possible with advances in technology.
Sure. So what are some of the problems specifically about maps and building a better map? I think at least myself, a lot of people probably take for granted that you pull up your phone, you got Apple. I know everybody's got Apple Map problems, but these things just sort of seem to exist. What are the problems specifically with mapping, and why is there a need for sort of aggregating this across the collective?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the challenges is just how expensive it is to keep a map up to date. As I said, a company like Google that wants to keep its Google Maps product up to date is having to send fleets of vehicles with professional drivers all around the world. And so there's a reason why when you go to a product like Google Street View, often those images are years, in some cases even a decade out of date. It's
Sure.
very expensive to go back and hit those roads again. And so your data becomes become stale pretty quickly. And so you have this trade-off between, cost and freshness and quality. And there are other organizations that have tried to tackle this problem in a different way, more crowdsourced approaches to mapping, like the OpenStreetMap project being probably the prime example of this, almost 20 years old now, kind of the Wikipedia of maps, so to speak. But then you have the challenges that come with a completely crowdsourced project. It's based on the altruism of volunteers, and in countries where people don't have the free time or the resources to be able to map for free, you just don't end up with very good coverage. And you have lots of people doing the coding of different objects in the world in very different ways, which makes a product that's not very good for developers to build on top of. And so really we see this in the mapping world today. There are these two poles, right? The very expensive, very high quality, which is not very developer friendly because of the cost, and very decentralized, inexpensive to use, but you have to do so much massaging to it, and there's so many quality issues that it's also not that good for developers to build upon. And so we see a better way to slot in the middle to offer something that is also very high quality, that is a much, much lower cost of building than the way that it's done today.
Interesting. It makes a lot of sense to me. You touched on developers a little bit. Can you talk through, this is a pretty wide question. I'm sure there's a lot of domains and verticals that this affects, but what are sort of the business value of having up-to-date maps? And you talk about that middle ground with developers. How are people building on these tooling, these resources? What did that look like before Hivemapper? And then how does that transition as you build something that's community driven and very robust as a resource in a public good?
Well, I mean, mapping is a huge industry. I mean, we're talking about an estimated $70-80 billion a year industry, and soon to be in the hundreds of billions. I mean, it's becoming more and more important as time goes on. Every app we use depends on maps. And, we all pretty much use a mapping app, whether it's Google Maps or Apple Maps or Waze or whatever. But even if we didn't, even if we never touched those apps, we'd be consuming those maps every day because they're embedded into apps like Uber or Airbnb or Yelp. They're all dependent on other mapping products, often APIs that they're buying from a third party. And so there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of entities that are all consuming these map products behind the scenes so that they can power the experiences that we use day to day. Not to mention all of the B2B, the corporate customers. Think of a logistics company that's moving freight, that they often have their own bespoke mapping databases to understand where the loading docks are, where the service entrances are. And so there's just kind of an endless application of maps. And I think, for us at Hivemapper, we're focused on laddering up to the most complex, highest value use cases. And so in the early going, that means selling into the most sophisticated customers who are used to dealing with large amounts of raw data to complement the maps that they have, the databases that they already have. And over time, although we're very focused on B2B applications in the near term, over time we can ladder up to more and more complex products that can serve the smallest developers, and who knows, maybe someday even consumer. But in the short term, very focused on B2B applications.
Sure. And so as you're transitioning from having what are either very expensive and potentially antiquated or not robust mapping solutions, where does the sort of the intersection with DePIN start to make sense? And are there other applications outside of just, you think of the Airbnb example or the Uber example, where this starts to become more interesting as it fits into a broader ecosystem, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the power of DePIN is using blockchain technology to align incentives across a community and to balance supply and demand. It takes a really huge amount of data to build a minimum viable map product. And so blockchain rewards are a really great way to reward people for collaboratively building that product that everyone has this shared vision of wanting to exist in the world. And one thing that's been really exciting for me to see is the way that these projects kind of stack upon one another, right? We're a DePIN project that people can participate in as they drive, through their daily lives, whether they're a gig driver or a trucker or just commuting to work. And then there are other projects out there that people can participate in, kind of using the driving that they're already doing. And I think that's good for everybody in the community, right? To have multiple ways that you can build useful things together while you go about the activities that you kind of would be doing in your life anyway. And so I think, the analogy that I use here is like why this is so powerful is it's like a community getting together to build a video game arcade in their neighborhood, right? Like
Sure.
one person's laying the foundations and another person's painting the walls and another person's installing the actual arcade game cabinets. And, if those people were just being paid cash, they get their paycheck, they'd move on. They wouldn't have any reason to care anymore, right? They got paid. So who cares if the arcade even opens? Like, who cares if it's a good place to hang out? But because we're all in this together as members of these DePIN communities, helping to build the arcade, we're incentivized to build the best arcade that we possibly can. We're incentivized to help other people around us to do a great job of building that arcade. And the better arcade that we build, right, the more that our friends and family will want to go there to put tokens in a slot and play games. And so the happier that we all are, right?
Yeah.
It's a really powerful vision, and I think there are great examples already of projects like Helium that have used this to bootstrap something that would just simply not have been possible before. We kind of owe them a debt of gratitude for blazing that trail, and
Sure.
we've learned a lot from them, and we think it's working quite well for us in the early going of biting off this enormous challenge of building a fresh global map.
Yeah. You touched on two things that I'd love to deep dive into a little bit further. One of those being the types of people that are mapping, but also after the fact, sort of thinking about the different components that go into this process. You mentioned it's more than just being able to collect things on a dash cam. And so I know that with respect to Hivemapper, there's quite a few different components that go into it. So I'd love to unpack that a little bit further, but really starting with who are the types of people that are collecting this data that are actually participating in the network, and sort of what does that look like on a very tactical or tangible level?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's several segments, I guess you could say, of people who contribute to the map. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are going to be driving for work anyway. You have people who are gig drivers driving for Uber or for DoorDash, whatever it might be, who say, well, I'm already going to be driving. Why not do something else useful and get some rewards for doing it, right? You have some people who kind of similarly are truck drivers or driving a commercial vehicle who are just putting a ton of miles on the road and say, well, I can do a great job of keeping all of my routes fresh by mapping for Hivemapper as well. We have some people who are either own a commercial fleet or are drivers in a commercial fleet who are saying, I'm going to deploy cams in all of my vehicles. Now I have dash cams in all those vehicles and I can earn some rewards along the way. And then we have some people who are, mapping enthusiasts or DePIN enthusiasts who, they're not driving the most miles, but they're really passionate about the project. They're excited to be part of it. And so they map their commutes, they map the errands they run with their families, and are excited to see the map grow around where they live and work. I think there's probably those are some of the big segments. And I wouldn't say that any of them has become really dominant yet. It's a big tent, and people, regardless of how you map or why you're mapping, we want to make this a great experience for you.
That's awesome. What are some of the other components that go into building out the robustness of a map? I know that one of the things you offer specifically is training AI models on, is this a sign or is this something else? What are the other considerations that are really important for building the robustness of this mapping technology?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at competitive map companies and look at all the APIs that they offer to developers, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of different products that customers want. There are some customers who are happy with just raw imagery. There are some customers who want to have very specific knowledge about specific features of a map. I want to know what all the speed limits are. I want to know where all the stop signs are, and so on. And so we've focused on those two use cases as the first things that we're targeting. So there's what's called the map image API, and then there's the map feature API. The first one just says, I want to know what everything looks like, along this path that I specify. And then the other one is, I just want to know about specific objects that you've detected along the way, stop signs, speed limit signs, things of that nature. And I think over time, you can expect more and more products to come online. There's one that we teased on our Twitter/X account recently. I encourage people to go take a look at, where we're building the capability for people to say, I want to know what's new with this very specific location. I want to be alerted when there's a change, when there's new imagery collected there. Maybe you want to see what the prices are at your competing gas station down the road. Sure. Or, maybe you want to make sure that when you've paid for a billboard that it actually showed up on the sign, right? there's endless use cases for something like that, and that's another product that we have in the works that we're excited for people to get to play with pretty soon.
That's awesome. I'd imagine that business or solutions like that aren't possible without having the DePIN consideration as a part of it. Because you mentioned earlier that if Google maps a street, for example, it could be up to a decade old, but you can sort of skew the token incentives to work in a way where it becomes more valuable for that real-time data collection because of a business model. How does that fit into
Yeah.
new lines of businesses that you're able to create as a result of the actual underlying kind of incentive mechanisms that exist?
Yeah, I'm gonna zero in on one word you said and kind of push back on it a little bit. You said skew the token incentives, right? And what I think the way that we've envisioned a product like this is we want this to be a self-balancing, decentralized map solution. We don't want any entity, whether it's the Hivemapper Foundation or individual members of the community or anyone, to be able to kind of shape the way that that tokens are being minted, right? It should be very programmatic in nature. But there are customers who really want a certain thing and they are willing to pay for that thing. And so we also have this capability that we call Honeyburst, where you can say, I really want this road mapped for whatever reason. No one needs to know why, but I really want it mapped. And so I'm going to put my honey on the line and say, whoever can go and map that, that will be extra rewards for them. And you combine these two things, like the ability to place a bounty on a place you want mapped and the ability to monitor the new imagery coming out of that location. That is an incredibly powerful combination, because now you're not just dependent on the passive mapping of just whatever people happen to map in their daily lives. You have the ability to create incentives that shape the way that people map, to say, oh, well, I was going down this road, but I see that there's a reward to go one block over. I'm going to go a little out of my way and map that. It's kind of a self-balancing, a supply and demand mechanism, and one that uses incentives to achieve things that, like you said, without it, you just don't know what's going to need mapping. We don't, we don't want one entity to have to make all those decisions. We want the community and all the participants in it to be able to influence what gets mapped and when.
Sure. There's a lot more fine tuning of the incentives because it doesn't have to be such a monolithic. Google needs to do it for one purpose. You can make it very fine tunable based on what ecosystem participants are looking for, which is exciting. Are there other examples like I want to make sure my billboard, or I want to check gas prices? Are there other examples that you can speak to or talk about that are being developed and utilized in the current moment?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that you could hypothesize are basically endless, right? There's so many use cases that you can imagine for a tool like that. I think one that's a good example that that customers are very interested in is understanding the condition of roads. Imagine if you're a local government and if a citizen reports a pothole, you're going to have to send out a truck to go and say, is there actually a pothole there? With a tool like this, you don't need to send that truck out. You can just look at the imagery and you can say, oh yeah, there's a pothole there. I see it. Or, you might want to know where, if you're, let's say that you're a logistics company and you have to send trucks through the world, where you're going to want to know where the construction zones are that are going to be impassable or difficult to navigate for your vehicles. And right now, it's very hard to get that information in any other kind of way. You're never going to learn that from something like a Google Street View. You could use a tool like Waze, and they have maybe a point on a map that says, we think there's some road work here, but you don't have pictures. You don't know what it looks like. You don't know what it entails. It could be one cone, or it could be the whole street closed, and you don't really know. And so, we see this as a really powerful way to keep an eye on the condition and the accessibility of roads in a way that hasn't really been possible before.
I think if anybody's ever used Waze as a product, I know that I'm a customer of Waze. That is something that's quite frustrating. Oftentimes you'll be driving and you'll get an alert that there's something on the road, but it could be as innocuous as a cone to there's a whole pile up of acts, and there's really no way of differentiating between that and the actual UI. So being able to leverage real-time imagery and data like that, I feel like would be a really big value add from the customer standpoint of using an application like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great illustration of why relying on mostly AI rather than on human intervention is the way to go. In order for a product like Waze to be safe, for people to be able to say what's going on as they drive through the world, it has to be incredibly simple and scaled down. Like, they'll say, hey, is that accident still there? Yes, no. Yeah. That's the only input you're providing. Yes, no. You can't say, yeah, but it's only one cone, or
sure,
the entire road is closed. You're not providing that kind of subtle information. But when you have passive mapping with a dash cam, there's an image. Like the truth of that situation is very clear. And as long as you're able to effectively and quickly extract intelligence from that imagery, you're able to provide a much more fine-grained understanding of what's happening in the world than is possible with a more blunt tool like just saying yes or no, or what type of thing do I see.
Sure. That data extraction, or maybe kind of analyzing some of the imagery, is that part of your long-term vision of helping businesses make more sense or create more value out of what you're creating from the sort of the data aggregation side? Or is that something that's really specifically done at the individual project or business level?
Yeah, well, so I think it's important to understand that the vision of Hivemapper is to build an open ecosystem with many developers building on top of it. And so there are foundational products that, of the Hivemapper network that are made available to developers. So the raw imagery, any developer can buy it at a fixed non-negotiable rate for map credits, right? But what they do with that imagery is up to them. And so, I'm an employee of Hivemapper Inc., which has been the project team that's been getting this project off the ground, that will be a developer on a level playing field with any other developer that comes along. And Hivemapper Inc. can say, I want to take that raw imagery and build products to sell to customers on top of that. But any other company that comes along and says, I want to buy that imagery and also, create these value-added tools, products, services, is able to do that as well. And so, as the people at the foundation are thinking about how to grow and nurture this network, there's going to need to be a line drawn to say there are foundational products, basic products that are kind of the utilities of our map that are made available to everyone. And then, beyond that, let's let the flowers bloom as individual developers build useful stuff on top of it so that they can kind of, compete for customers for the more specialized products. There's kind of a subtle line that needs to be drawn there. And I think we're still in the very, very early stages where, it can be difficult to see, okay, where does that line fall? But there's been a lot of thought and a lot of intention around creating a diverse developer ecosystem around the raw map data. Because having kind of a monolithic, only one company using the data is not a healthy, long-term sustainable situation. It needs to be something that's wide open for the hundreds of thousands of developers who use maps to be able to mix and match and build to their own custom specifications.
Sure. The need is to solve sort of the base, ensure that that's as robust as possible, and then you can continue sort of building and iterating from there. I'd love to talk about some projects that are specifically using Hivemapper, but before we do that, I want to ask, for people that are interested in building, whether it's a DePIN project or if they're sort of in the market for being a Hivemapper customer, what have been the challenges, and I'm sure there's a myriad of them, between creating the incentive mechanisms, between sort of ensuring that there's a baseline robustness for having enough imagery? Like, what have been some of the challenges that you've worked through in the last year? I'm sure there's been a lot of them. Can you talk about them, how you've sort of approached solving those problems? So for other builders that are looking to get started, they can use you as a case study of what to do or maybe what not to do in some instances.
Yeah. So I think there's a few key things I call out here. And one is really the chicken and egg problem, right? That until you have extremely large scale, in our case, it's map coverage. In other cases, it might be something different. Until you've reached scale, you won't be able to compete on a level, at parity with some of the incumbents in this space. And so you have to have a very clear strategy around how you ladder up to being relevant, on par with the competitors. What are the segments that you're going after that allow you to, win customers, drive meaningful revenue, drive the demand side for your token, that bridge the gap to being large and relevant. And I think a lot of if you're overly focused on the vision and not on the tactics and execution of winning those early customers, it's not going to end well, right? That's one thing I'd call out. I think another is having extremely strong subject matter expertise in the space that you are going after. If I had to bet on an extremely experienced subject matter expert who's totally new to blockchain, totally new to the DePIN space, who has never written kind of how the tokenomics will work for a new project, if I have to bet on that person or a person who is kind of a crypto native who's been around the block a few times and is trying to get up to speed on a vertical that seems like a cool application for DePIN, I'm going to bet on that first person every single time. Because ultimately, there's only one thing that matters in being successful as a DePIN project, and it's building real useful products for real customers that they are willing to pay for. If you haven't done that, it's no different from any other business.
Right.
You might be excited because you've activated some users. I'm sure there are people out there who will look at a website like CoinMarketCap and feel very good about themselves, but it's not long-term sustainable. You have to have real customers and a real product. And I think, we ourselves, we spend most of our time focused on the nuts and bolts of how do we make sure that we are collecting extremely useful map data at scale and turning it into useful products. And that means that you're engaged on some what might seem like fairly mundane problems, like how do we get the positional accuracy of our images down to like sub-lane level so that when I say a stop sign is right there, it is exactly right there. Like that is a very technical and seemingly mundane problem that is hugely important to map data customers. And I think, frankly, there are people who would like us to spend more time like writing elaborate roadmaps or, pontificating about tokenomics. It's like, okay, that stuff is simply not going to move the needle compared to, making sure that positional accuracy is dead on perfect for a map data customer. And I think it's really important to have your priorities straight and use kind of the tools of DePIN as a means to an end of building a thing that needs to exist in the world, rather than using the thing that you think would be kind of a cool application of DePIN as a hook for building a project. It has to go in the right direction.
Yeah, it always comes back to first principles. And you mentioned something though that triggered another question I have, which is one of the important considerations for you is saying, hey, this stop sign is 5 feet away, or it's on the other side of the road versus right here. I imagine it's an extraordinary amount of data that you have to be able to process for that. Are you leveraging things like AI and other tools to be able to help you ensure that you've got really high quality sort of validation steps or things that are automating that for you? Because I can't even imagine what that process might look like as an outsider looking in, how you'd be able to do that in any efficient kind of manner.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. When you think about how maps are built today, it is, even today, it is still largely based on human labor. If you think about something like OpenStreetMap, there are people who are volunteering their time to draw lines and polygons on a map to say, here's where the things are. Like there are humans doing that. And they happen to be doing it, for free, but it's huge amounts of labor. Right. And when you think about the Google Maps of the world, they have thousands of people, in call center type arrangements in kind of lower cost countries around the world, doing that, frankly, pretty monotonous work over huge amounts of imagery. And we see AI as being an incredible enabler here. You can't go straight to a 100% AI map. It has to be kind of a hand-in-hand partnership between humans and AI. And that's the way that we have it set up. Like we can automatically extract the objects from imagery. We can automatically classify those objects. We can automatically position those objects in the world. And along the way, we have humans there to verify, to validate the outputs of the AI. And those human inputs become, reinforcement learning for the AI to get better and better at the job that it does. And, so in our, with our AI trainer tools today, people are able to provide a lot of that feedback to the AI. And we've already been able to take several of the tasks that had been assigned to humans and move those over 100% to the AI and take them out of human hands. Like the learning pace is going to be dramatic, and we will be able to reduce the human labor cost of building a map while saving the more like intellectually challenging, more interesting problems for the humans. Now, there is still a very large cost to AI, right? I mean, the cost of processing all that imagery, of extracting objects from it, it's a very large amount of compute and storage and so on. Sure. And so a big part of our emphasis is getting more and more and more efficient at that over time. How do we move more of the processing to the edge? How do we only process imagery that actually has things in it that we haven't seen before? There are lots of things that we are doing and will be continuing to focus on to be able to scale this in the most efficient way possible.
That makes sense. Is part of the token economic model, is it designed in a way where anybody can come and help train the AI model and then get compensated or rewarded? Is that basically how the model works right now? So anybody can engage and participate?
Yeah, anybody can go to hivemapper.com and become an AI trainer. Anybody can create a wallet and get started right away. And I think, the big challenge there is making sure that what people are contributing is really high quality contributions, making sure that the people who are contributing are actually people, right, and not bots. And we've done a lot of work on that front, and I think we're quite good at making sure that the contributions that people are making are high quality.
That's great. You don't want the bots training the bots, because that will create this
It doesn't end
downward cycle.
well.
Does not end well. We talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to go back to it and talk about some of the projects or the companies. Are there specific businesses or projects that you can point to as a success story, or just an example of what is currently being built on Hivemapper? I know we talked about a few hypotheticals, but I'd love to hear some actual tactical projects that are currently building with Hivemapper, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, it's still very early days, and unfortunately, we don't have the privileges to be able to share like specific case studies. But
For sure.
we did publish just a week or two ago that we've officially started to license Hivemapper network data for paying customers, and we're excited to start sharing more details on that as soon as we can. As I mentioned earlier in the call, I think where we are really focused right now is laddering up to the highest value use cases through the things that we're able to achieve right now. And so that means providing map data to complement existing data sets, whether that's a logistics company, a map company, or whoever else that might be, as well as on applying this combination of honeybursts and the location monitoring tool, which we're calling Scout internally. We'll probably start using that name externally soon.
Okay.
That combination is very powerful, and all it relies upon is raw imagery from the network. And so I think that those are the two types of use cases that we're focused on right now. And we're excited to share some of the details on specific companies, specific use cases as soon as we possibly can. It'll be an exciting day when we're able to do that.
Yeah, well, we're excited to hear more. And on that note, you are having an anniversary, which is Hivemapper turns 1 at the end of the week, which is actually when we'll be sharing this podcast episode, which is great. You've accomplished a lot in the last year. I don't know if you want to talk about a few of the other things that you've accomplished, but also what does it look like from 1 year out? And you touched on a couple of those products.
Yeah. The first year's been amazing. I mean, we have tens of thousands of contributors who have added to the map. We've mapped more than 80 million total kilometers of road. We should cross 6 million unique kilometers of road any week now. It's really amazing progress. I mean, there are places in the world where almost all the roads have been mapped at least once, and we're refreshing huge chunks of them every week. It's really incredible progress. And I just want to give a shout out to everybody in the community who has made that possible. I've said this a lot, but we live in an era when people can spend their time on like an endless number of hobbies, an endless number of projects. And I just want everyone to know how grateful we are for every minute that people choose to spend their time on this journey of building a better global map with us. People have so many choices, and we're so grateful for people spending their time with us. As far as what the next year looks like, the first year was all about supply. And, of course, there's a lot of focus on the supply side, but the second year is going to be all about demand. We've collected all of this data. We've built these really, really cool tools. How do we find and grow the customer base around those tools? Because ultimately, like I said before, that's everything in a DePIN project. If you don't have the ability to find product market fit and sell real products to real customers for real money, nothing is sustainable long term. Sure. And so that's where our focus lies. We do have some work going on around what do next generation dash cams look like? How do we continue to improve some of the weak spots in the contributor experience today? There's a lot to do there still, but year 2 is going to be all about demand. And I think members of the community will be excited to know that what they've spent all this time and energy building is being used and for really exciting use cases. I can't wait to share more about that with the community.
Yeah, that's incredible. And we're very, very excited to continue seeing all the success and traction that's going to happen in the next year and many years ahead. If there's sort of a final call to action that you wanted people that are interested in what you're doing to go and follow, look into more, what would be that quick call to action so folks can stay engaged and learn more about what you guys are doing and what you're building over at Hivemapper?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd encourage people to dabble in the parts of the mapping pipeline that they haven't been engaged in to date. If you've been training the AI, maybe consider joining somebody's fleet and doing some mapping. If you've been focused on the mapping side of things, go and dabble in the AI trainers and understand how that imagery that you submit becomes a finished map product. I don't expect, if somebody is spending their day as a professional driver and working pretty hard, I wouldn't expect them to spend a lot of time training the AI, but spend some time and understand how it is that we build a useful map out of it. I think it really helps people understand what great imagery looks like, and how we support people around us in collaborating to build something really meaningful for the long term.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that if anybody's looking to start engaging in another project, that I know there's a lot of projects, but if there's something that you're passionate about, we'll be sure to link all that information below. So you can go check out Hivemapper, absolutely check out Gabe as well, see what they're talking about, working on in the space. And we'll be sure to have all that for folks to be able to find. Gabe, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on. You've taught me a lot about something I knew very little about, which is mapping and sort of the world that is involved with what you're doing over at Hivemapper. I think you guys are a really good example of both how to build a product-first solution that uses DePIN, and obviously your success is transitioning into something that will be both supply and demand side, which is sort of what we're all trying to figure out, that sweet spot and mix around in the DePIN space. So I wanted to say thank you. We'll be sure to link everything below. We'll wrap it up there, and we'll see everybody on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gabe.